Greetings and welcome to the latest edition of the Entheogenic Evolution podcast. As always, I am your host, Martin, and I'm happy to have you with me today. For this week's episode, my guest is Luke Jensen. He is the founder and CEO of Enlightenment.com, which works down in South America and pairs with various psychedelic retreat centers to help clients optimize their healing and transformation experiences with psychedelics such as ayahuasca and wachuma by giving them QEEG brain scans along with neurofeedback work and practice throughout the course of their psychedelic treatment. We had a great conversation on this topic. It was just about a month ago, a little bit over a month ago, now that we had our conversation, and I'm happy to bring it to you here today on the podcast. But of course, first, let's get to a few announcements first. Hey, this week I have two new patrons to thank who have joined up over at my Patreon page, patreon.com/MartinWBall. I've got Leone and Talat, both of whom signed up at the God Molecule level, which is the highest tier of support that I have over at my Patreon page. There's everything from $1 a month all the way up to the $100 a month. But once you sign up at the God Molecule level, that also gets you a 1-hour monthly video call check-in with me. It's a great way for you to get support if you are looking for any kind of ongoing mentorship, ongoing integration and support, or reflection. Of course, there's no obligation. You can change your support level at any time. You can cancel. You can move to a lower tier if you want. But for as long as you support at the God Molecule level, you get that 1-hour monthly call. And that's what Leone and Talat are looking for, and that's what they're going to get. The tier down from that is the CAP level, and that comes with a 30-minute call every month. And so there's other ways that you can support there. And of course, as I've mentioned, if you support anywhere at the $20 a month and up level at my Patreon page, that gets you full access to the Entheogenic Evolution archive, which features probably a couple hundred hours worth of materials that are no longer active here on the podcast because there's only so much storage space. And also now these days, even when I remove a podcast from the podcast host, which is Patreon, it goes over to YouTube and is still available there. However, that feature at Podomatic has only been around for the past couple of years now. So that means there's still many, many back talks and interviews, and even from the events that I organized here in Ashland, Oregon at the Exploring Psychedelics Conference, which I held for 5 years. All of that is available over at my Patreon page, just exclusively. It's the only way you can get access to those materials. So if you're interested in that, and again, it's $20 a month and up, that there's no obligation. You can listen to them all within a couple months. Then if, that's all you want to do, that's all you want to do. But anyway, thanks for Leone and Talat for signing up at the God Molecule level. Always happy to receive patrons at that level because I get a chance to get to know them and work with them over time, and appreciate that. And of course, if you are just looking to have an integration call with me, you do not need to sign up over at Patreon. You can just arrange a 30, 60, or 90-minute video call with me. I'm happy to set that up with you. Shoot me an email at martinwball@gmail.com or stop by at martinball.net or non-dualentheogenicintegration.com if you want more details about those services and how to set up a call. And of course, speaking of integration, now this is going to be the last time that I mention this, but the next round of my 5-MeO-DMT Integration Specialist training course with Mindscape Institute starts this week. It starts on Wednesday, September 17th. It is being held for 9 weeks. It's every Wednesday is live class from 3 to 5 p.m. Pacific time. I still have a couple spots available in the class, so it's not too late. If you're listening to this on Monday or Tuesday or even Wednesday morning and you want to sign up, shoot me an email at martinwball@gmail.com. I can get you in. But that's the last I'm going to mention of that, because then we're going to have class for the next couple of months. That is the fall term of this class. Sometimes people have been asking me, like, well, when are you going to teach it again? Maybe I'll do it next time. Sometime in the spring of 2026, maybe. I don't really know. There's no solid plan on that. So if this is a class you're interested in, I'd say now's the time. Anyway, that's the last time I'm going to mention that because class starts this week and then there's no point promoting it anymore. Yeah, of course. Also, just speaking of Mindscape Institute, I just want to give a shout out to the students who have been enrolled in the 5MEO DMT facilitation course, which is not my course. I teach in that course, and I've got 2 more weeks worth of conversations with students in that class, and that class is wrapping up. So I just want to congratulate everybody for moving through that course. It's definitely a longer course than the integration course, and it's been a pleasure working with those students, and possibly even looking to get to know some of these students by doing some in-person work with them, possibly sometime later next year. Or I should say early next year, but after the class is done. If you are interested in the 5MEO DMT facilitation course, that also has current open enrollment, that the next round of that class starts, I think it's October 17th. My understanding is that there are still a couple spots available for that. You can stop by at mindscapeinstitute.org if you want more info. But of course, that is a separate and distinct class from my 5MEO DMT integration specialist training class. One last thing is just to remind you that starting next week, alternating every other week in between interviews, just as I always do, we're going to be having selections of my audiobooks, and we are going to be going back into Tales of Arduin. I'm going to be sharing volume 3 of the 4-book series. We're going to start with chapter 1 of The Alchemist and the Eagle. Just a reminder, when I put out these audiobook podcast episodes, I'm only putting them out for 2 weeks at a time because I do not want the entire audiobook just to be available for free, and it takes up storage space at Podomatic. So it's up for 2 weeks at a time, and then I delete those chapters before I upload and release new chapters. If you want the full audiobook, of course, you can always go to Audible, Amazon, or the Apple Bookstore. Books 1 through 3 of Tales of Arduin are all available. That's Oribai's Vision, The Fate of Morani, which we just finished last month here on the podcast. And now we're going to have The Alchemist and the Eagle, which is volume 3. And then we still have The Fifth Temple to come. Hope you enjoy the story. Of course, all of my books are available in audiobook format in addition to being in paperback and ebook. And so you can find that wherever you find books and audiobooks and stuff like that. All right, let's go ahead and jump into it with Luke Jensen. Again, he is founder and CEO of NeuroEnlightenment.com, and he's going to tell us all about it here in this interview. I hope you enjoy. Be back next week with the beginnings of The Alchemist and the Eagle. Well, I am very excited to welcome on to the Entheogenic Evolution podcast today, Luke Jensen. And we're going to be talking about the intersection between psychedelics, science, and consciousness. I think it's going to be a great conversation today. But Luke, welcome to the Entheogenic Evolution podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, Luke, are you actually now physically down in Peru? Is that where you are based or located? That's what the website says, but...
I am based and located in Peru. I'm in the States at the moment visiting family. I was in the MAPS conference last month, and my grandparents are getting a little old, so I'm coming to visit them, 93 and 92. So, yeah.
Nice. And where's that at in the United States?
Omaha, Nebraska.
Oh, yeah? Is that where you're from?
Yes, that's where I'm from.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
I think you might be the first interview I've had with somebody who's in Nebraska.
All right.
Yeah, there's a lot of people on the West Coast, a lot of East Coasters, but yeah, not a lot of people in Middle America. There's been few interviews with people in Middle America, so that's exciting.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess the whole story is kind of interesting because you think of people in plant medicines, from California or the coasts, but yeah, my story took me down to Peru as well. So
yeah, well, that's going to be a great place to start because whenever I have a new guest on the podcast, I always like to invite them by sharing their story and kind of introducing themselves to the podcast listening audience. If you ever are a return guest, we'll skip that portion. We'll just get right into the meat of it. But just to foreshadow where we're going to be going, you are heavily involved in QEEG mapping of psychedelic states of consciousness. So those are the brain caps that you put on. And some of my listeners will be familiar with the video from me from several years ago of doing a QEEG with 5-MeO DMT. But we're going to be talking about all of that. But first, let's start with you, Luke, and your journey of how you got into this area. And also for the podcast listening audience, your website is neuroenlightenment.com. And we're going to be talking all about that. But first, let's get to know you, Luke. Let's start there.
Yeah, thank you. So, like we just discussed, I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. And like so many people, I started this after the military. So I joined the military when I was 2003, when I was 18, and I joined the Marine Corps. And I was 6 years in the Marine Corps, and I joined the National Guard Airborne Infantry Unit. I deployed to Afghanistan around 2010. And that was right after the war on terror happened. So I joined after patriotic duty. And when you go and you're thrust in those environments, often your views change on the world, the war, our political motivations, and there's many things happen along the way. But I basically became disenchanted when I was in Afghanistan of like the whole system and what we're fighting for. So from there, I went to Peru a year or two later after I got back. I was in a search to find myself, and that took me to Peru. So I went and tried ayahuasca in Peru. And being a Marine, I didn't have any experience with anything. I had this really powerful experience. And I realized there's way more to the universe than we think there is. So that was the short version of my story. The whole story is just that.
Yeah. So actually, just let me pause you right there, because I always like to ask, like with somebody who's been in the military, coming out and making that decision to go and work with ayahuasca, what was kind of your first awareness around this idea of, quote, plant medicines, using that for transformation? Like what was it that opened that door for you? What brought your attention to ayahuasca?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was 10 years ago now, so it wasn't as common. You didn't hear about it as often, but it's definitely in the podcast world. And I was a big podcast listener. And so that's one point in me where I'm searching for something, any kind of healing to help me out with my symptoms of PTSD and anxiety. And like, what can I do? And I was already on a natural route that I heard about this plant, ayahuasca. And I heard it on Joe Rogan, and his guest at the time was Amber Lyon, who I found very, very impressive. She was more of a skeptical person going into it. And I heard that, and like, okay, I'll give it a try. So that's how I started.
Yeah. And had you been working with the VA to try and address your anxiety coming out of like, war zones and combat zones? And had you been like frustrated there? Had you been getting help there? I'm just curious, like what is that lived reality for somebody who is a vet and trying to get help?
Well, to be honest, I think one of the biggest challenges for vets is asking for help or telling people that they need help. Because what I was going through, I didn't talk about it with anybody. Didn't talk about my family, didn't talk about friends. And in my mind, I'm like, I'm all right. And because there's a certain thing that happens in the military where you don't want to be a burden on the team. So we naturally take these things and keep going and going and going. And I was kind of like that. And I was just trying to do different things for myself. I never went to the VA for the longest time. I tried supplements and yoga and meditation. I was trying to do natural things like that to help me out and just looking for anything. So the VA became later. It wasn't until fairly recently, actually, I started talking to the VA. Like, it's probably a good idea to, have me in the system and talk to them a little bit. But for me, I see myself and lots of other veterans where the first step, even asking for help or saying like, hey, like something's not right, and reaching out to that ecosystem around you, because there's not just the VA, there's many other organizations too for vets in general, and just your general support system, like family and friends like that. So I think it's a really important part for our veterans, just that first step to do that.
Yeah, to actually reach out. And, it's interesting that, not to, burst your bubble or anything. I don't think you have a bubble, but you're definitely not the first vet I've had as a guest on the podcast. It's a major area within the modern psychedelic movement of people coming out of combat situations or deployment situations, feeling that they're not able to get help that they need. And for a lot of them, turning to psychedelics for the very first time. It's not that they had a history prior, but looking at, in a state of desperation. And then
Right.
there's a lot of now vets groups out there that are working with these medicines. This is one of the places that 5-MeO DMT has really exploded is among veterans groups of working with people with severe PTSD and suicidal ideation. So you're not alone. You're in good company there, but definitely you're
Yeah.
going with a different sort of tact with the EEG work and this Neuro Enlightenment, which we're going to get to, and we're going to talk about that. But it's always a pleasure to have people who kind of didn't come from, quote, psychedelic culture, but found their way into it because they found it to be efficacious and useful
Yeah.
for their own healing and transformation.
And for me, I never really, like, quote unquote, psychedelic culture because before the Marines, I never did psychedelics. And then I went straight into the jungle. So it's not really like psychedelic culture as we think of the United States.
Yeah.
It's a whole different world. But
Yeah.
yeah, now I'm kind of understanding the whole world of that. But it's very different though, because I've noticed there is that kind of like we're in the jungle with the medicine, it's medicine. And then we're back in the States, there's many different sides to that. But yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah. So I would love if there's anything that you wanted to share about that first experience. That for me, this is always kind of a fun question to ask people. Like, what was that like for you in your very first entry into an experience with ayahuasca? And, if you just want to say, hey, it's personal, I'm not up for sharing that, that's totally fine as well. But just know it's an invitation. If there's anything that you'd like to share about that, even just from, the sense of culture shock, as you mentioned, like you're in the jungle. This is a very different environment. It's not American culture, that you're
Right.
somewhere else experiencing something very, very different. And probably going through, what we refer to as ontological shock, where you have that sense of, wow, because you already mentioned this, like maybe the world isn't what I thought it was. Maybe that there's different levels of things going on here that I wasn't even aware of before. So anything you'd like to share along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to share the story. I've shared it a few times before, but it's a really powerful story because it's often, especially that first time you really experience, ayahuasca, it's just it'll live with me forever. But so like I was saying, I was desperate for anything. I got this flight with a friend down to Iquitos. I flew into Iquitos and we went up by boat 4 hours into the jungle to this ayahuasca retreat. And just being in the jungle and the environment, I think was very, very healing.
Mm,
I think just the stress of concrete jungles that we live in the West, we kind of forget like what that does, like traffic and everything else. So for veterans, I mean, many veterans that just live overseas because it just feels better. And especially in the jungle, you're just all of a sudden your circadian rhythm starts matching nature. You hear nature all around you. And my first ceremony I prepared for, like a good, guy from the Marine Corps, I was meditating. I was really preparing for it. I was doing the diet. I was very strict. My first night, actually, nothing happened. And I was super disappointed because everyone else had
yeah.
really powerful experiences. And, but sometimes it takes ayahuasca to work a little through you. And sometimes, um, you have to really like have that intention. Like you can't overly grasp for these experiences. I think it was kind of teaching me to be patient. And but the next night, so we're in a Maloka. It's on stilts, so it's their Shipibo temple. And since the floods in the Amazon, it's 20 feet in the air, and all the walkways are 20 feet in the air to the bathrooms and the bedrooms and stuff.
Mm,
So the whole place is really like, kind of interesting, and there's no natural light. It was all natural light, no artificial light. And the Milky Way galaxy is above us. So it's this beautiful scenery. And so they gave me a bigger dose. I started walking on the walkway to go to the bathroom because I felt something coming on. I started walking back, and what happened was I paused to look at the jungle. And it's one of these visions that are very hard to describe, but so visceral, so powerful that it felt like religious awe, something
yeah.
you read about. I was a big reader in history. I'm raised Catholic, so I knew these experiences happened, but never had one. And here I was having this, and the jungle was all these beautiful, bright colors, all these lights of energy connecting everything. And this overall sense of oneness and wholeness.
Mm.
And I was just super taken back by this. And then, as you know, with ayahuasca, purging's involved. So I purged over the side, and like I said, I was 20 feet up on this walkway. And what I saw was the whole earth open up and this dark energy come out of my mouth, going 1,000 miles into the earth. This overall sense of the earth accepting all this negative energy that have accumulated in Afghanistan before.
Mm.
And this experience was just so overwhelming. And I went into the Maloka. I saw the shaman healing people. I saw auras. I saw things that I never thought were possible. So this really came to me. Well, it didn't come to me. It was very obvious that we're spiritual beings with souls, and there's so much parts of us then that we don't really understand. So that really changed the course of my life and where I went after that.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. It's, I can really I'm just picturing that in my mind of you like out on that walkway and just sort of the universe opening up to you. Like what a powerful experience. And that was just on the walk from the bathroom back in the Maloka.
Yeah,
And
yeah, exactly.
yeah, and it is interesting how sometimes, for whatever reason, people aren't ready for that first dose, whatever capacity, that's not a judgment call. It's just
Yeah,
like whatever it was, like it didn't work for you that first night. And I'm glad that, it didn't discourage you. Cause sometimes people then say, well, screw it. Like this doesn't work for me. And I always like to say like, look, results vary and like, go back again. Cause you just don't know that there might've been something blocking you,
right.
and you never know what's going to happen that next night. And that sounds like it was really powerful and transformative. Now, since you mentioned it, this is also something that I'm always really curious to ask people about, is how your sense of religious identity or religiosity or belief system changed or perhaps was augmented or reinforced. Like for some people, they say, well, I drank ayahuasca and it was confirming of my Christianity. And other people might say, wow, Christianity didn't work with what I was experiencing here. And so I've had a big shift in my beliefs. I'm curious, how would you describe that for yourself, either from that first experience or then via additional experiences? How would you feel your quote religious or spiritual identity has been changed or not changed through this?
Yeah, so I was raised Catholic. I actually went to a Catholic boarding school for high school run by Benedictine monks. And I was very Catholic for the longest time until college. I think I had a crisis of faith and I became an atheist for a while. And I was also reading books like Dawkins and, I consider myself a skeptic. And then, about the time I was thinking about ayahuasca, I was also kind of thinking about spirituality again. And then, so those two thoughts kind of started coming at the same time. Um, when I had that experience with ayahuasca, there's multiple phases of it and multiple ways I can look at it and lenses. But I think one of the major things I think about in faith and spirituality is that religious experience itself, not critical, important that is. And it doesn't have to be through psychedelics, but whatever that is. I think Carl Jung and many other philosophers call it the numinous experience. I have that spiritual experience. And for me, that was way more powerful than faith that we always talk about.
Mm.
So I think these experiences are human beings are meant to have them, whether through yoga or meditation, through training, whether it's spontaneous. These things are throughout history. And I think that it's fundamental to who we are to have these experiences. And to not have these experiences, we're truly missing out something major in our lives. So I guess that's the foundation of my thoughts going from that point forward. And then it really opened up the whole idea of that, souls, energy, what all this means. I mean, so when you realize that's real, you're forced to live your life a little differently. What does it take to keep your energy healthy? What does it take
Yeah.
to, do that soul work? And all of a sudden, you might become, for me, almost you start reflecting more, or maybe too much, because you're always trying to work on yourself and make that better. But that's also kind of a trap in the spiritual
Yeah.
process. Um, and I think lastly, too, this came to me very vividly. So I had my last ceremony. So we had 4 ceremonies that week. In the last ceremony, I was overlooking the Amazon with the Milky Way above, like the stars very bright, I could see everything. And I realized that Europeans also had our own shamans at one point in time. And it's something that we don't think about, but this was the basis for all religions everywhere. And I think that Europeans will have to rediscover their own shamanic practices and their own types of healing in the future. So those are the things I came away with after uh, that first week.
Yeah. And it sounds like, particularly through that deep purge that you mentioned, and perhaps there was more because ayahuasca it keeps working. But it sounds like most likely that started to produce that shift that you were looking for, that entry into healing and actual transformation, and not just floundering along.
Right. I mean, I think that because you're right, there's so much more that I had many tough ceremonies after that, and they're not all beautiful. Some of my tough ones are the most I learned the most from and healed the most from. But yeah, that shifted everything. And then how that went from there was like focusing on energy and energetics. And there's a whole different side to all that.
Yeah. So that then brings me to my next question. Like, because there's one thing to be a vet and to go and do like a week long ceremony and working with ayahuasca and then return back to your life. But obviously, this became a turning point for you, at least at some point where you decided, like, this is what I want to focus on. This that I want to learn more about this. So was that immediate or like what was that process for you? Like how did you keep going on this path of understanding the energetics of being, understanding the energetics of transformation, healing, things like that?
Yeah, well, 'cause I think about this as well. You know, how do I end up from the military in Afghanistan to living in Peru and doing QEEGs and things like that? So, but I think looking back at myself and kind of reflecting on your own life, partly I joined the Marines is for the adventure, to not live like a normal life, to engage in things that are a little different. And coming, especially after being deployed to Afghanistan, where you're used to being a Humvee, and I was an MRAP, I was a gunner. I was a saw gunner, so I was going to mountains with all this ammunition and machine gun, and just that those are my days. So to come back and go to like a normal job and clock in and clock out didn't really compute with me.
Yeah.
And the next thing I know, I went down one more time, and then only in the modern world can a shaman message you through Facebook. And the shaman messages us. He goes, "Hey, I have my own." We met him at a big retreat. He goes, "I have my own little maloka in the jungle. Come visit me." So my friend and I flew down and visited him, and then we're doing ayahuasca with this certain group of Peruvians, Shipibo, that were the first gringos ever come down there, and we're just living down there. And it's just like this whole new world opened up to me that I couldn't like just go back to the normal world. I kind of want to explore it more and figure it out and just be with it.
Yeah. So when then did you make the move, or maybe this was it that like you're going to be living in Peru from that point on, or
Well, it took a little bit. So I was kind of coming back and forth, and these ideas are in you, but it takes certain things to really um, take that step or that leap. And it's when COVID hit where I decided, like, okay, I'm gonna go live in a foreign country, with all the stress and everything that was happening here at the time. Like, I'm gonna go live somewhere else. So,
yeah. So then you've been down there since then?
yeah,
Yeah. Except for now you're in Oklahoma.
yeah,
Yeah.
Omaha,
Oh, excuse me, Omaha. Excuse me.
yeah.
Pardon me. No offense to the O states. Sorry. So then let's start talking about the scientific aspect of it then. So when did this lens come in with the neurofeedback, the QEEG, and even we're just gonna invite you to explain the difference between these two things for the listening audience. But wherever you'd like to start there with how that entered into your worldview and picture and combination with the psychedelic medicines.
So around the same time I went to Peru, one of my friends in Omaha, she was doing QEEG brain mapping and neurotherapy. And it was pretty rare technology at the time and still not too common now. And so I went into her office and she took a brain map of me. And she goes, "Luke, you have your brain image correlates to PTSD and anxiety. So immediately I was just kind of fascinated by this. You can look at her brain. And then she described that I can train a brain through neurofeedback to become healthy and healed. You can
So,
train.
sorry if I could just pause you right there, but when you say brain mapping, like what does that mean? Brain mapping.
So a brain map, so what we do is call it QEEG. It's a quantitative electronic encephalogram. So a regular EEG, you'll see the raw data going across the screen, the raw brainwaves. The QEEG passes that through software and passes it through basically a filter, and we compare that brain map, that EEG, to hundreds of thousands of others in the database. So we create a database. With this database, we can look at markers for anxiety, depression, head trauma, ADD, focus issues, and many other things. So it's a lens to look at the brain and see what's going on, basically.
So would this be then like a color-coded image of the brain that's showing where different parts are active or what kind of brain waves are participating in different relationships between parts of the brain? Is that the kind of data that's being produced through this?
Yeah. So you'll see a topographical map, which would be an image, and you'll see where the brain waves are at in all locations. You can get very, very detailed and go, but basically, without going too much into it. So we can see with colors everything that's going on. Places that are underactive and overactive. And when some place gets underactive or overactive, there's usually some kind of psychological symptom that comes with it. So if I see a certain pattern, I know, okay, that pattern is associated with this. If I see another pattern, I see it's associated with that.
Okay. So then your brain map
Yeah,
matched up in the database with people with PTSD.
correct. And I thought this was really interesting because, like I said, I was a tough Marine. I didn't want to talk to anyone about my problems. But once you describe neurofeedback training, oh, that sounds like a video game or peak performance. It didn't really sound like, you know, talking to someone about my whole life history. So it was much more approachable for the kind of person I was at the time, or much more amenable to my constitution, I guess.
Yeah. So this is the point where I'd invite you to go ahead and explain that. So what's the neurofeedback? And this is something that I don't know if a lot of people have a lot of experience with. I know that like the image of the EEG cap, I think, is fairly recognizable for
Right.
people. But the neurofeedback, and I've done neurofeedback myself, so I'm familiar with it. But if you can kind of explain how that works and this video game that you
Yeah.
just referenced here, that for anybody who doesn't know about it, that this is going to kind of be a black box of like, what the hell are they talking about?
Yeah, it's neurofeedback is hard to explain at first sometimes. When people get it, it's really like, oh, okay, that's really cool. So this is why I became fascinated with it because the neurofeedback is basically training the brain. You train the brain waves. So it's operant conditioning basically. But basically you're inviting the brain to go in a healthy way and you're training away unhealthy brain patterns. How it works is you put an electrode in the head and reward the person with a good brain wave. You inhibit the person for a brainwave we don't want. That might not be doing them good, like say a high theta state when they're awake. That'll affect their focus. So that's the basics of it. We train two different ways: open and eyes closed. And eyes closed, we can train deep states. We can train hypnagogic states and meditation. So when I first started reading about brain waves, I realized there's tons of potential to heal anxiety, depression, head trauma, things like this. But what really got me interested is the spiritual potential of the brainwave training, because everything's a brainwave. So meditators are engaging in a certain brainwave, and there's many other states as well. So that's what really got me interested in the field and how it could apply to plant medicines and psychedelics.
Yeah. So I think we still need to explain then the video game aspect of it. So I'll share with you. So in 2019, I went through a medical crisis where I I had a deteriorating sleep for a number of years. And it reached a point in the beginning of 2019 where I completely lost the ability to sleep. And I went 10 consecutive days with no sleep. I was being prescribed all kinds of sedatives. All they did was
Yeah.
make me high, did not put me to sleep at all. And I honestly, I was freaking out because like I cannot go to sleep, and this is the most horrific torture I could ever possibly imagine. Now, at the time, I happened to mention this on Facebook, like you mentioned, like in the modern world, people can contact you on Facebook, and it's
Yeah.
great. And a neurofeedback technician down in San Diego, California, reached out to me, and he said, "Hey,
Okay.
I've developed a neurofeedback system that I developed actually in Afghanistan, working with vets to help them overcome PTSD and with like severe sleep disorders." He said, if you come down to San Diego, I guarantee you I'll get you back to sleep. I was like, fuck it. Yeah, I'm coming down. So I flew down there, and we did the brain mapping, and then he hooked me up with like the little neurons or the little electrodes, and then there would be music playing. So I had headphones on, and there's music playing, and there's all these interruptions in the music, and then so some of it was like closed eyes listening to music, and your brain's doing stuff while that's going on. And then other times there's like watching these video game like projections on a screen, and it's like these objects kind of moving through these landscapes, but the instructions were to focus on the space around the object. Don't focus on the object itself that's moving through the screen, but the space around. And then also there was another set of sessions where he actually gave me this teddy bear that was hooked up to this vibratory system. And every once in a while, the teddy bear would like bzz, bzz, and buzz while I'm listening to the music. And so anyway, we did like a month's worth of neurofeedback over the course of a week. And
Yeah.
I started sleeping around 2 broken hours a night at that point. So I really feel that it saved my life to some
Oh,
degree. And
yeah.
it's hard for me to say like how much did the neurofeedback do versus the fact that I had a doctor step in and say, "Hey, Martin, I can help you." And I think that was a major, major factor
Yeah.
because this was happening when I was up here in Oregon, and all the doctors I talked to was like, "We don't know what to do with you. Like this is too complicated. Good luck. We'll see you in the insane asylum." So when this doctor
Yeah.
said, "Hey, I can hook you up to this
Yeah.
neurofeedback," I think that just having that quote bedside manner, I think that went a
Yeah.
long way. And then possibly the neurofeedback potentially saved my life. So I'm really grateful for that opportunity. So that was my experience with it. But so. Did you also have like the little video screen and you're like watching stuff, or was it mostly the eyes closed? Did you have a vibrating teddy bear?
Well, no, I think that's very interesting. Can you mention where it was at or where'd you go?
Yeah, it's the Alpha Theta Center
Yeah.
in
You know,
San Diego,
I know
California.
who they are. The owner of it, he's really into psychedelics as well. So
Yes.
I watched his presentations, but I haven't met him personally yet. But yeah, I know who he is. Um, no, I just find your experience really, really interesting because yeah, he's one of the most experienced people in the field, so I'm sure he was doing something. But the Alpha Theta is a very beautiful protocol, and it's beautiful that they named their center after that. That's my favorite
Yeah.
protocol. And that protocol, what you do is you close your eyes and hear noises, and these noises reward you when you go in a deeper state. So you're going into hypnagogia. So it's not exactly meditation; it's different. It's between sleep and awake. It's kind of like
Yeah.
where you go to bed, you see images pop up. That's what it is. So, but the state is also a very spiritual state. This is also the state of spirit, soul, magic, however you want to look at it, unconscious. But that's where you can like program your subconscious or engage. And for some people, astral projection, it depends. But I find your story very interesting. So, but you described it very well. I never had a teddy bear. So it's probably some kind of like some kind of additional feedback. So we just reward people with the screen, like on or off, just with noises. So
Hmm.
it sounds like, and the Starscape too. I haven't seen that before. That sounds very interesting. But it sounds kind of like open focus, where the Western mind, we over focus on objects, but we can focus in the space between objects. It can be it can change how we interact with the world. It sounds kind of like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's how he described it. It was a open focus program.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So I did a lot of that over one week. And then when I got back here to Ashland, Oregon, I started going to somebody who was providing what was called Neuro, and I was doing that
Yeah.
3 times a week. I did that for about a year, interspersed with with acupuncture 2 to 3 times a week, and that's how I was trying to address the whole sleep disorder. And I've not been able to fix it. I still have a sleep disorder. It's a chronic sleep
Yeah.
disorder, but things are just so much better than they were back then. So yeah, the neurofeedback I think was very important.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm sure acupuncture as well. I think neurofeedback and acupuncture go really well together.
Yeah,
But yeah, so and the neurooptimal too. So that was a type of neurofeedback.
yeah, got me through the crisis. Yeah, so that was your experience, but that was before you went to Peru.
It was around the same time. So then I became fascinated with them and with both these topics. Then in 2020, I went to Denver, the International Conference for Neurofeedback, and that's where I met my mentor. His name is Dr. Richard Suter. He goes, I'd love to train you. Because he heard about I told him my idea on combining plant medicines and neurofeedback and brain mapping. And he goes, I've been waiting to meet someone like you. I'll train you. And for him, he's a very spiritual person, and he believes that neurofeedback has all this spiritual potential. And he's also a Zen Buddhist, and he understands shamanism. So we started collaborating after that. He's been training me for the last 5, 6 years on reading brain mapping, QEEGs, and just this whole project I'm doing now in Peru.
Okay, so now let's talk about the project. How does this work? How do people get involved? What are you doing with them? Does everybody get to wear the hat? Yeah, let's talk all about it. I'm really curious.
So yeah, when COVID first ended, I was the first flight to Peru, and I brought my brain mapping QEEG equipment, and I started doing it kind of just small scale on friends and stuff like that. And then I started offering to retreats. So when a retreat comes in, we offer the brain mapping, and they can do basically their guests that come through. We do a pre-map and a post-map with all their guests, and usually it's ayahuasca retreats that we work with. And then after the retreat, we would show the guests the changes in their brain. So it wasn't just no longer like, was this just a psychological event? We could show the changes in their brain, that there's neuroplasticity, that depression is lifting or anxiety is lifting. So it's a very powerful validation for people. So that's how it started. And then later we started running our own retreats. We bring it in and we do the neurofeedback training on our off days when we're not doing ayahuasca. So that's part of our integration. So we're leveraging basically the neuroplasticity from plant medicines and the neuroplasticity gained and neurofeedback. So both of those are increasing what we see as like the healing potential or the healing that they're experiencing.
Yeah. So I think this is a really sort of interesting methodology because, of course, so much around psychedelic experience is hard to quantify. And it can be very difficult for people to determine, like, well, I don't know, maybe I just changed my ideas or I changed my beliefs or I changed my attitude, but did I really heal? How much of that was me? How much was the medicine? I mean, these are common questions.
Yeah.
These are natural philosophical questions that people would ask about
Yeah.
psychedelics.
Yeah.
So, what kind of things are we then seeing when people are doing these before and after brain mapping? Like, what are you able to point to that people can say, "Wow, that's interesting," and also again, how do these changes? How do they correlate with what is known in the brain mapping database? Like what kind of results are we getting? What are people seeing, and how does that help them understand their experience better?
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting because I was the same way after ayahuasca when you said like, was it this? Was it that? Did it really do something? So I think that's kind of natural to the Western mind, and that's kind of who we are. So the brain mapping, yeah, so we'll show them right away. We see changes in depression and anxiety, which we kind of expected. So I've actually published 2 papers, one on ayahuasca, the pre and post brain mapping, and Wachuma. And as far as I know, I think we're the first paper to brain image Wachuma, which is pretty cool. But with what happens is I think it's a really important point that people will have to like. Science is gonna need to like start shifting how it looks at things because trauma is stored in the body in certain ways. So we take a brain map, we're seeing that everyone has some amount of trauma and it's stored in the brain. We can see how it's stored in the brain different ways. So basically, after a period of doing ayahuasca, we can see that trauma lifting. But how we see that's many different facets. So this kind of goes into the philosophy of brain mapping and how what we're discovering. But basically, from a mentor system, he designed a lot of this. But some people store trauma by like having a busy mind, for example, that doesn't slow down. Some people store trauma by having disassociating, lack of focus. Some people might worry about the future. Some people might feel guilty about the past. All these are kind of different methods of holding the trauma in. So our brain's literally compartmentalizing the trauma. But after plant medicines, what seems to be happening is that whatever that person is dealing with seems to get better. So a brain that's underpowered seems to speed up. A brain that's too busy seems to slow down. If they seem to have a worry pattern, that seems to go away. If they have head trauma, like brain inflammation, that seems to go down. I'm not sure how many studies have mentioned that yet, but I think that's going to really start coming to the fore in the next couple of years when they start really researching head trauma with ayahuasca and plant medicines. So we're seeing all these different effects. So it's almost like whatever that person needs, they seem to get. And it's kind of, more and more, it seems like there's intelligence involved. But also, if you look at the brain, you think about the brain, the core, the base brain structures are emotional brain structures. And then all our advanced systems are the cortex on top of that. So we have emotional trauma. It's stored right in the center, right in the heart of the brain. That's affect everything else. So when we start healing emotional trauma, the brain itself will start getting better. And I think that's what we're seeing, but we're still just scratching the surface. So
Yeah. Well, I really love what you just described here about how people seem to get what they need. And this, I think, is one of the most fascinating things about using psychedelics as medicines is that they are non-specific in the sense that, well, let's say I have inflammation and I take a drug to reduce my inflammation. The idea is this drug treats this particular symptom. And then if I have a different
right,
system, I need a different set of drugs or different medicines or
right,
different therapeutic modalities. And what's so fascinating about psychedelics is that they do seem to have the capacity for, quote, whatever ails you, this has the potential to make it better. And that, as you say, that perhaps there's an intelligence there because it's not, the results are not mechanical. It's not just take this and you get these mechanical results, but
right,
you take this and you get these more holistic results that are actually tailored to you and your issue. So as you're saying, if some person has an overactive mind, they might take a psychedelic and then their mind relaxes. And then somebody
yeah,
who is like brain fog and sluggish,
yeah,
they might actually speed up. So we get
right,
opposite results, but we're still getting a rebalancing and we're getting a quote, a healing from that.
right.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I think it's really gonna like to look at this way. This you said mainstream medicine, you give like a certain drug or whatever it is, and it moves people one direction. And I was very surprised that it would move anyone wherever they needed. But the more I started thinking about it, the more it made sense. I mean, in different ways. The trauma model described, but also we're spiritual beings. So if it's working us at a spiritual level or an energetic level, that would make sense that the body would adjust and heal in different ways to that.
Yeah. So with offering this, is this something that everybody who comes, I mean, so I know you have the Neuro Enlightenment, you have a center now. Is that correct, or is this in conjunction with another established retreat center, or how does that work? I'm just curious. Like, does everybody get it? Does everybody come and get the brain mapping, or
So, so we run our own retreats, and everyone that comes to our retreats, they get the brain
they
mapping.
get okay? They get the
They
brain
get
mapping.
pre and post, and we actually do some neurofeedback trainings during the retreat. We also partner with retreats because for us, we can partner with retreats and we offer this service to people coming through different retreats that might be interested in knowing what's going on in their brain. And also, the more brain maps we get, the larger we can build a database for research, so we can start publishing more studies. So Yeah, we also work with other people as well. So we're going to start working with someone in Colombia next month with the brain mapping. So
Okay. So then, in terms of clientele who are coming in, I'm curious what is sort of the demographics of people who are getting this done? And because what I'm wondering is, are you finding, are there specific brain issues in specific demographic ranges, or are you finding, is it just a basic human issue, or is it certain groups of people seem to have certain deficiencies based on cultural or political, social circumstances, life circumstances? Are you able to make any determinations that way? Let me just put it that way.
um, good question. So people coming to Peru are often, somewhat they're self-selecting, right? We're probably getting
Right.
like a certain group of people there anyway. Um, and probably people that like for me, a lot of them was like the last ditch case, so or
Yeah.
sometimes like we got the um people are dealing with a lot and they need a lot of help, which is just what we're there for. Um, I think there's lots of parts to that question. So
Yeah.
what we're seeing now, we're seeing a lot more busy mind pattern now in the last 10, 20 years, especially in Western countries. I don't see as much in Peru. I think it has to do with technology and how we're always interacting with, screens and stuff like that. Um, as far as different groups, everyone has something. Everyone has something going on. Like no brain is without trauma. So no brain comes in, like perfectly. But the kind of things I usually look at are kind of like business people will have a kind of a certain kind of brain. They're always a to-do list, accomplishing things.
Yeah.
Your artists might have kind of like a different kind of brain. You know, um, but it's hard to make any too much generalities. That's kind of what I've looked at a little bit.
Okay. Yeah. I was just curious about that. Here's kind of a curious question. Have you ever yet had a case when you've been doing the brain mapping and the the after brain map is pretty much identical to the initial brain map, yet the person subjectively says, I had an amazing experience and I cleared out all this trauma. In other words, do we ever get like a negative, I don't know if that's be the right term, but is there ever like a lack of result that we can see on the brain scan side, but people are claiming they've had a powerful experience, or is there always a correlation? If somebody says that was amazing, we're going to see an impact in the brain.
So generally, that we always see the brains move. Some move a lot, some move less.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because it's hard to correlate one to one.
Yeah.
Like this person had a super powerful experience and their brain moved like that much. It's not always like that. Sometimes if you have a powerful experience, I might kind of see a small movement, like, oh, okay, that's great. So we're kind of looking at trends and patterns, but yeah, sometimes it doesn't always correlate one to one like that.
Yeah. So then, since you've done this both with Wachuma and ayahuasca, so just for the listening audience, in case there's any lack of knowledge here, Wachuma, also known as San Pedro, that's part of the phenethylamine class of psychedelics. So that's mescaline, which is a completely different psychedelic family than ayahuasca, which is DMT and a tryptamine. Are you finding any significant differences between Wachuma participants and ayahuasca participants, or are you be getting similar kinds of results? Like, in other words, could we look at the differences in brain mapping, and would you be able to say, oh, I can tell this one's Wachuma and this one's ayahuasca?
No, I don't think at least for me, I don't think. Yeah, I can't see that big of a difference from my type of brain imaging because we're kind of seeing how trauma is reduced. Because our brain imaging, we're looking how trauma is stored in the brain. We're looking for it places that are not regulated, right? So it's all the degree of regulation as when we're looking at the brain map. We see neuroplasticity too, but I think for that we're going to need different kind of brain imaging to see the differences and like what kind of networks they're affecting. But with my brain imaging, I can see that the trauma is being reduced from both of them, basically. That's how I'm looking at it.
Yeah. So with the Wachuma, is there anything in particular that stands out there? So you said that you did release a paper on that. And I'm just kind of curious because I think that there's probably at this point there's been a lot more research done with ayahuasca and tryptamines in general than with, say, Wachuma, San Pedro.
Yeah, Wachuma, San Pedro, I think is super important. I think it's really underestimated, how much really part of the family of plant medicines it is. I think MDMA, ayahuasca kind of has the spotlight on it, mushrooms, but Wachuma is very, very powerful. Um, for example, at our retreats, a lot of people, the Wachuma day is their favorite, you know, and they enjoy it more than anything else. I kind of look at Wachuma as more of a heart opening, and sometimes you experience nature with it, whereas ayahuasca is going really deep in the subconscious and like ripping those
Yeah.
demons out and stuff like that. Um, but it's going to be interesting how we look at this because so much of what we're doing with psychedelics is like really early stages. So it's just lots of exploratory research. And I was kind of surprised how little research has been done, especially with brain imaging. But even questionnaire studies. So if Wachuma, for example, only had like one questionnaire study in like 2021, like fairly recently, So we're still like so much to scratch, so much to just scratching the surface. We have a lot more to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So how many QEEG machines do you have in order to do this with your clientele?
Well, now we're kind of expanding because we're working with different retreats. So, generally speaking, at our retreat, we have two going as we're mapping people, but we have three or maybe another one now, four. So, yeah.
Yeah. Um, how about doing the QEEG during the ayahuasca or Wachuma experience? Is that something that you've done any of it, or is it strictly before and after?
Um, I did Wachuma because I wanted to do that because no one's done that and published that yet, at least, as far as I could tell. So I did Wachuma with that. But for me, the reason I'm doing the pre and post because that part's been neglected from what I could tell from most the research. They're not so far. There's been very little tracking over time. They've done brain imaging during the experience, and that's really powerful. Where we see like how the networks are what's happening in networks, and maybe there's a lower power and default mode network and stuff like that. But I really focus on the pre and post because that's the data set that no one's really looked at, and I think more needs to be done there and further out. So it's not just pre and post, but like 6 months out. How many people are still doing good? How many people regress? And then also I think the more we do to this will give us insight into maybe certain plant medicines might heal different things more effectively, like PTSD or head trauma. So we could use a brain mapping as kind of a diagnosis to look into like, okay, maybe this plant would be good for him. I don't know. But there's a lot to explore.
Yeah. Well, it's always exciting when there's an area where we can say, like, there's a lot to explore here because that's exciting and allows for new applications of these scientific methodologies. I'm just curious. So, with the active brain mapping with Wachuma during the experience, anything in particular that stood out that you could share that you guys found there?
Yeah, so for us, it seemed like the brain like relaxed a lot during the experience. But it doesn't always hold true across the board too, because
Yeah.
some people like, it's a novel experience. So you're kind of talking before about one-on-one, like, their stress might actually be going up a little bit, but they're having the best experience in their life. But it's so novel, it's stressful to the system. Like, what is this? But even though they're really enjoying it
Yeah.
too. So
Yeah. I'm curious if you'd be able to just walk us through the different brainwaves and different states of consciousness or agitation or relaxation that they're associated with.
yeah, so you have four major brainwaves, delta, theta, alpha, and beta. And then you have gamma, which is still kind of a brainwave that's being discovered. It's a very quick, small brainwave that runs on other brainwaves, rides them, I should say. So in general, broad strokes, delta is associated with sleep, theta is associated with hypnagogia, alpha is is more meditative. There's different parts to that. And then beta is your day-to-day to-do tasks, cognitive function. And just off the bat, why it's very important, modern people spend a lot of time or way too much time in that cognitive brain. But these lower brainwave states we can access. And the whole idea of neurofeedback is we can teach people to access these states more effectively. So it takes a meditator years to learn, we can train quicker. Because everything's at brainwave. So if you think of alpha, what is an alpha brainwave? Well, basically, it's billions and billions of neurons in the brain firing a certain rhythm to create that brainwave. But it's a physiological habit happening in the brain. So I also like to think of brainwaves as these are states that are happening. We're reading the energy field of these states.
Yeah. I'm curious, have you had anyone um, come in with, oh, but this is spirituality, and you're trying to reduce it to brain waves, and we don't like your scientific reductionism. Have you had any kind of pushback along those
Oh, I've
lines?
had lots of pushback,
Really?
because I came down like this could be so cool. I was kind of surprised. Well, some people, I mean, they do it from a very sincere place. They're like, "Hey, this is spiritual stuff. Why you bring technology in here?" And some people will say, like, "I don't want to know what's going on. You're taking away the mystery by doing this." And so that's one side of people. But I'm always careful to explain to them, or actually explain to them and go, "Hey, like." This will never explain consciousness. This will never explain your personal visceral experience. All this is a lens that we're looking at this with, that we can maybe understand it better, but it'll never explain the whole experience. If anything, it'll increase the mystery of it. And so that's one side of it. I think that people kind of are just a little distrustful of technology in these
Mm,
spaces sometimes.
yeah.
So, but once people see it, they often get really converted. Like, wow, I never liked technology until I saw this. And now I'm like, wow, this could really help us out. And I think one woman even said, like, how did ayahuasca get in like a computer? Like it's amazing.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I was just imagining that there might be some pushback along those lines. I think it's fascinating, and I think any kind of objective data that we can produce that helps us understand more of these mysterious healing processes that we go through that might actually make it more efficacious in the long run.
Right.
I think that that's useful, and I'm more than happy to wed science and spirituality and religion and psychedelics. And I think the more lenses we have, the more data we have, I'm happier. So I'm all for it. Just know I'm rooting for you on that. But I'm not
Thank
surprised that
you.
some people would be like, oh, it's profane. You don't want to bring that in, and this is sacred. And because I think that there's a fear of scientific reductionism of saying, well, it's just a brainwave state. It's like, but that's still, as you say, that doesn't actually tell us what consciousness is. It doesn't tell us
Right.
what the experience is. It's just, it's looking at, we do produce brainwaves. We know that. And we know that they are associated with different states of consciousness and different qualities of consciousness. And if we can find ways to tweak them to optimize and heal ourselves, and if these magical plants work magically to rebalance this whole thing, isn't that interesting, and isn't that worthwhile having that data, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. And at the same time, we always tell people like we're gonna, you know, we do during the ceremonies for our research, but when we're offering retreats, like we know this space is sacred. We're not gonna like interfere with your ceremonies, and this is just as sacred to us. I think it's also true that science doesn't do any favors, or mainstream scientists, when they want to like do this reductionist model of like we're gonna test this molecule in a clinic, and this, try to like, and it has its points, but like I always emphasize we're looking at the holistic approach to this, and it's more exploratory research. We're just trying to find out these like more broad correlations. So for one example, we saw a person, because we did questionnaire studies along with our brain mapping. So they had a brain pattern for ADD, and they had self-report symptoms of ADD. And after 3 ayahuasca ceremonies, it was completely gone, you know? And I had no idea this could even help with ADD. It doesn't make any sense to me. I talked to my mentor about it. Like, well, is ADD a possible trauma response? There's a trauma pattern. And he goes, yeah, it can be. So that alone, that little piece of knowledge can lead us to go, hey, this can help a certain population. We don't know yet. So that's why I think it's very interesting to figure these things out.
Yeah. So in terms of the retreats themselves, so people come in, they get their initial brain map, then they're working with ayahuasca, or they're working with wachuma, and then they get their end brain map. Now in between, they're getting neurofeedback sessions. So how does that work into the program?
Yeah, so we generally do a couple neurofeedback sessions, and eventually in the future we want to do more intensives. We're going longer periods of time with more sessions. But basically, during the retreat, we work with them on the alpha theta protocol, like I talked about, that takes them to hypnagogic states. So for some people, they can have visions. It's also very good at relieving trauma because all the trauma, emotional trauma, is stored in those deep subconscious states. So if they have trauma, they can relieve that, but also they can have visions and archetypes, and it goes really well with plant medicines because the neurofeedback works with the neuroplasticity, like I said, and so does the plant medicines too. So they combine very well.
Yeah. So I'm curious if you run like a test group as well. Like, for example, so you mentioned like just being in the jungle can be therapeutic for people, especially coming
Yeah.
from the busy city. So do you ever take someone who comes down and they don't participate in the ayahuasca, they don't participate in the neurofeedback, but also let's do a brain scan on day one and then a week later of just hanging out in the jungle?
I have not done that. It's a good idea, though. That'd be really good to see that because I'm sure there would be an effect as well for that. So yeah, that'd be good to do.
Yeah, I just think it'd be interesting and just kind of do these control groups versus the medicine groups and all of that. And I just more data. I'm always interested. Like more data, I
Yeah,
think is always
yeah.
interesting.
No, it's the thing too because there's so many different things you can go with it, right? Like I have all these ideas in my mind of things I want to brain map and image, and what we want to do. So
Yeah. So you've been doing this for a few years now. How did in like establishing this? I mean, this is a different approach to working with ayahuasca, right? You're going to get a brain map. You're going to do some neurofeedback. In establishing this, like, how did you first develop clientele, and how do people find you? And again, for the listening audience, the website is neuroenlightenment.com, which shares all about this. Yeah. How did you develop that base?
well, it was very small at first. So I came back to the States and a friend goes, a Marine Corps friend goes, "Hey Luke, I want to come down there. Do you run retreats?" I'm like, "Well, no." He's like, "Well, if you do, I want to be on one." It's like, "Okay, let's do it." So he came down, my girlfriend's mom came down, and a couple people we met just started inviting people and they started coming down. And but very small groups, and that's how we started working with people. And still we're still small, we're growing, but we're still small. But it's really nice because we do right now we're doing a maximum of 6 people to do a really intimate
Mm,
process with everybody. And yeah, it's kind of accumulation of all these ideas and visions of like what's been so healing for me and the people I work with. And that's what's led to where it is now.
yeah. So you mentioned that you went to the Big Maps conference. I'm curious, from your perspective, kind of working on this melding of technology, science, consciousness. Um, were there talks and presentations there at the conference that got you excited and make you feel like, okay, this is developing, or did you just what was your impression? Did you feel like this is still underdeveloped? I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, it was interesting going to the MAPS conference because I live in Peru, so it was in Denver. There's like almost 10,000 people there. And it was huge and all these rooms going, and it's a very different feel than what I'm used to. Um, but yeah, there's lots of good work being done, I think. Um, the QEEGs are being used more now, I saw, which is really interesting because I think they're a really powerful way to do the brain mapping. And I think I talked to a few people about what we're doing, and the interest is rising for sure.
Yeah. I'm also curious, do you have any knowledge about what's going on with the VA? And I asked because I was really super surprised. 2 days ago, I got an email from a woman who introduced herself as a psychiatrist working with the Department of Veteran Affairs. And
Yeah.
she said, I'd like to ask your opinion about the use of music in therapeutic sessions with 5-MeO DMT. And I mean, she asked the right person. I ended up writing like a 5,000 word essay in response to her, but I was kind of floored that I got this email from the Department of Veterans Affairs asking me this
Interesting.
kind of
Yeah.
question. So I'm curious, with you being a vet, do you have any inside knowledge of like what's going on with the VA or where they might be looking at these kinds of therapeutic modalities or?
You know, I have some friends that pay a lot of attention. I need to more. I'm kind of like my own little world in Peru, but I meet people that come down, and I think it's different from VA to VA. I think different locations. Some of them are really starting to change, and they're telling me all these crazy stories where their VA doctor's like, "Yeah, go try ayahuasca," and some I think are very traditional still. So, but that's very encouraging. You get that phone call. That's really cool. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it definitely surprised me. And it was an email, not a phone call. But and also I invite her. It's like, this is the kind of thing I want to talk about on my podcast. And apparently she's a fan of the podcast. So
Okay.
we're going to have her on at some point, and we'll be talking more about it. Um, yeah. So where if you could do like the next study, what would you want to do? What would be different from what you've done so far? Or like you mentioned, like it's still kind of an open area. Like what would you like to see more of specifically with this brain science and psychedelic medicines? If you could like encourage people to do more research or what you would want to do, what would that be?
Um, Yeah, I think the brain imaging will become more and more important. I think tracking change over time will become more important because we all know that something's happening during the experience that's important. But the track the change over time seems like that's been understudied. So we need larger studies, bigger studies with that. And I think then we also need to like pick out certain populations, and see, like more detailed, more
Mm,
controls than what I had. We were really figuring out like different population groups and how it's affecting them differently. I think it'd be really cool.
yeah. Actually, and that just it's kind of related to something I asked you about earlier about potential demographic tendencies or trends that you might see in the brain mapping. But just another question that comes to mind is, have you seen significant differences between men and women's brains, for example?
Well, so our databases just compare women's brains and women's brains and men's brains and men's brains. So I'm not an expert in that question because I'm just looking at the database that was built. But I'm sure there is. I just don't know it offhand how I view brain imaging, basically.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, I was just curious.
Yeah.
It's getting close to the time for me to go pick up my son from camp. But is there anything that I didn't ask you about that you feel is really important that you want to communicate about all of this?
Yeah. So Neuro Enlightenment is our website. We also have Tiwa's Awakening. We run retreats too for our veterans. It's more of kind of like it's for anybody, but it's kind of more of an adventure retreat. And yeah, you can find us there. And we might even run a retreat in Iceland next year. We'll see what happens. So
Oh, really?
yeah,
I actually have some people trying to bring me out to Iceland. I've never been, but I'm kind of curious to go to Iceland. But they want me to come, and I'm kind of curious to go.
you should. It's a beautiful country, and they're really into the elves. They see the
Yeah.
elves still all everywhere. And if you go, I know some great places where people are into plant medicines and stuff. There's a place in if you go to Reykjavik, it's called Mama Reykjavik. It's a little cafe. You gotta stop by. They're all plant medicine people there.
All right. Well, I'll keep that in mind. Yeah, I've never been to Iceland. I've always wanted to go. I'm into photography as well, and it's one of my passions. And I really want to do some landscape photography in Iceland because it looks really cool.
Oh, it's beautiful. You'll love it.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Luke, it's been great getting to know you today. I've really enjoyed having this conversation, and I want to just encourage you to kind of keep going with all of this. And also, I would love to just stay in touch, and perhaps, at some point down the road, as more studies and you've got more data, if you've got more to share, would love to invite you back on the podcast to talk more about it. Because again, I think that this intersection between science and psychedelic states of consciousness, I find it really, really fascinating. And I like to promote that kind of thing. And so just want to encourage you to kind of keep going, keep at it, and just reach out anytime if you've got something really interesting to share. We can bring you back on and we can talk more about it.
Hey, appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for your time today, Luke.